My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm 41 years old, and the last time my family laid eyes on me, they decided I wasn't worth standing beside. I still see it clearly. The kitchen of our childhood home, the same linoleum floor we once raced across in sock feet. Only this time, my sister Emma stood tall in her press blouse, her manicured finger stabbing the air at me. "Look at yourself, Becca," she said, her voice laced with pity and disgust. "Mom and Dad would be rolling in their graves if they could see what you've become." My brother Jake leaned against the counter in his $1,000 suit, arms folded like a judge. "We tried to help you after the military thing didn't work out," he added, the words hitting harder than any punch. The military thing. That's how he dismissed 8 years as an Army MP, 2 combat tours, a Bronze Star. They had gathered us that Sunday not to share a meal, but to make a point. Emma announced her engagement to Preston, a hedge fund manager whose last name sounded like money. Jake bragged about his promotion at the firm. And me? They said I wasn't invited to the wedding. Emma's excuse was smooth. "It's nothing personal, Becca. Preston's family is very traditional." But she couldn't meet my eyes. Then, Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook like he was performing charity. He scribbled a number, tore the paper, and held it out. $5,000. "Get yourself cleaned up, maybe some classes. But don't contact us again until you've got your life together." I looked at that slip of paper resting in his hand. To them, it was pocket change. To me, it was a price tag on my existence, a measure of exactly what they thought I was worth. I placed it on the counter without a word. The room was silent. No clinking dishes, no hum of the refrigerator, just the heavy judgment of 2 people who had once been my closest allies. I could have argued. I could have shouted about what I'd done, about who I really was. But undercover work requires silence, even when it cuts like glass. So I walked out. For 3 years, I stayed gone. 3 years of being the family disgrace. 3 years of them telling anyone who asked that I was a failure stuck washing dishes in Nebraska. But here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined. I wasn't a failure. I wasn't a dishwasher. And the next time they saw me, it wouldn't be in jeans stained with grease. It would be in a uniform that told the truth they never cared to hear. Stay with me, because the moment I walked back into Emma's perfect wedding, everything they thought they knew collapsed. I walked out of that kitchen 3 years ago with nothing but the clothes on my back and the sound of Emma's disdain echoing in my ears. $5,000 sat untouched on the counter. To them, it was an act of generosity. To me, it was blood money, a payoff to disappear. And so I did. The world believed I was scrubbing plates in a truck stop diner in Nebraska. My siblings whispered about me to extended family, shaking their heads, embarrassed that the youngest Hayes couldn't pull her life together. They told themselves I was stubborn, broken, incapable. And in their silence, in their absence, they left me to carry the weight of their judgment alone. Except I wasn't just washing dishes. I was living another life. My cover was airtight. My uniform was replaced by a stained apron. My secure apartment by a cramped, shabby room above a gas station. My badge was tucked away in a locked box while I memorized the smell of fryer oil and cigarette smoke. I clocked 18-hour days, not for minimum wage, but for survival, earning the trust of men who trafficked in lives, who saw women and children as commodities. Every morning, I woke to the rattle of trucks pulling into the diner lot. I wore jeans so faded they looked gray, shoes cracked along the soles, a shirt that reeked of grease no matter how many times I washed it. I made sure every detail screamed failure. If Emma or Jake had walked through that diner door, they would have smirked and said, "See? We were right." But they didn't. Not once in 3 years did they reach out. Not once did they check to see if their sister was breathing. My phone never lit up with Emma's number, never buzzed with Jake's text. I became invisible, erased from their picture-perfect world of country clubs, promotions, and Instagram-worthy vacations. The hardest part wasn't the danger of the job. It wasn't the nights I drove miles into desolate fields to meet men with dead eyes and darker souls. It wasn't even the constant fear that my cover might crack and I'd end up face down in a ditch. The hardest part was knowing that my family had already buried me in their hearts. I remember one night, snow piled against the diner's windows, my shift long over. I sat alone in that shabby apartment, staring at a photo I kept tucked inside my wallet. The three of us, years ago, smiling on the porch swing with Mom and Dad. Emma with her perfect hair, Jake with his athlete's grin, me caught in between them like I belonged. I traced the edges of that photo with my thumb and wondered if they ever thought about me. Did Emma glance at the empty chair at Thanksgiving and feel the absence? Did Jake ever hesitate before bragging about his family, knowing one member was missing? Or had they edited me out completely, like a mistake you crop from a picture before you frame it? That was the pain I carried into every undercover meeting, every staged transaction. The sting of being dismissed by the very people who should have known me best. There were nights I wanted to scream the truth into the darkness, to call Emma and shout, "I'm not broken, I'm saving lives," to text Jake, "I don't need your money, I make more than you ever will." But secrecy was the price of the mission. Silence was survival. So I swallowed their rejection along with burnt coffee and cold diner food. The operation dragged on, month after month, always one lead away from breaking wide open. Every time I thought we had enough evidence, my supervisor would shake his head. "Not yet, Hayes, we need them all. If we pull the net too soon, half will slip through." So I went deeper, trusted more monsters, let them believe I was desperate, easy to manipulate. I wore humiliation like armor. And every time I felt myself cracking, I remembered Emma's voice. Mom and Dad would be rolling in their graves. She meant it as condemnation. I made it my fuel. Still, the loneliness ate at me. I'd walk the diner floor, rag in hand, and catch my reflection in the smeared chrome. Dark circles under my eyes, shoulders hunched, a stranger looking back. I barely recognized the soldier who once stood tall in uniform, or the young woman who used to dream of proving herself to her siblings. Some nights I cried quietly into my pillow, careful not to let it show the next day. Undercover work doesn't leave space for weakness, but grief isn't weakness. It's proof that you once loved, and I had loved Emma and Jake more than they ever knew. I carried that grief through 3 years of living as a ghost in my own life. When the bust finally came, it was almost surreal. Radios crackled, doors splintered, sirens wailed across 4 states, 17 arrests, 43 victims pulled from hell, 12 of them children. I watched terrified faces turn to relief as we loaded them into vans, and I thought, this is why I stayed silent. This is why I endured. But when the adrenaline wore off, when I was back in headquarters scribbling out reports, the old ache returned, because victory in the field didn't erase the empty space where my family should have been. I had given everything, blood, sleep, years of my life, to protect strangers, yet the people who shared my blood had chosen pride over me. That scar ran deeper than any wound I'd taken in combat. And then came the call. My supervisor's voice, calm and steady. "Pack your real clothes, Hayes. You're going home." Home. The word lodged in my chest like a foreign object. I hadn't been home in 3 years. Not to birthdays, not to Christmas, not to Emma's engagement parties or Jake's endless promotions. Home had become a memory, preserved in photographs I couldn't look at without bitterness. But home was also where Emma's perfect wedding was about to unfold. The same Emma who uninvited me, who told me I was unworthy of standing beside her. I closed my eyes and pictured that kitchen again, her finger pointing, Jake's check extended, the silence after I left. 3 years of swallowing that humiliation. 3 years of letting them believe I was nothing. Now I had a choice. I could file my reports, take my leave, vanish to some beach, and let them go on believing the lie. Or I could walk into that wedding wearing the truth on my shoulders. I opened my closet, and there it was, my dress uniform pressed and waiting, the ribbons gleaming even in the dim light. My hands lingered on the fabric. If I walked into that ballroom, the facade would end. The story Emma and Jake told about me would collapse in front of everyone they'd tried so hard to impress. And I wasn't sure if they deserved that truth. But maybe I did. I didn't sleep the night before the wedding. The decision gnawed at me, circling endlessly in my head. Stay invisible or step into the light. For 3 years, I had perfected the art of silence. But silence had cost me more than bruises or exhaustion. It had cost me my family. I laid my uniform out on the bed in the government quarters where I was finishing my reports. Navy blue, pressed crisp. The 5-pointed star of the U.S. Marshals Service gleamed against the fabric. My ribbons formed a neat rectangle, each one a sliver of sacrifice. Bronze Star, Medal of Valor, service commendations, proof etched in color that I wasn't the failure Emma and Jake branded me to be. I ran my hand over the fabric, tracing the stitching like it was an old scar. Wearing it to Emma's wedding wasn't protocol, not technically, but protocol had never accounted for siblings who cut you out of their lives and wrote you off as worthless. At dawn, I drove to my apartment, the one I'd kept locked up through the assignment. It smelled of dust and neglect. A half-dead plant slumped on the windowsill, mail piled by the door. It felt foreign, like a stranger's home. I showered, shaved, packed a single bag, and changed into the uniform. The collar pressed sharp against my neck, grounding me in a way no civilian clothes could. By the time I hit the road, the sun was high. My black Ford Explorer hummed steady, government plates catching light as cars parted for me on the highway. I watched cornfields roll past and thought of that diner, the smell of burnt coffee, the way my fingers had pruned from endless dishwater. I thought of Emma's finger pointing, Jake's voice calling my service the military thing. The memory didn't sting as much now. It steeled me. The Riverside Country Club rose from manicured lawns like a palace. White columns gleamed, windows reflected the afternoon light, and valets in pressed vests hurried back and forth. It was the kind of place Emma thrived in, polished, flawless, dripping with approval from the right people. I parked near the entrance. The security guard at the door glanced up, ready to ask for an invitation, then stopped when his eyes caught my uniform. His posture straightened instantly. "Good afternoon, Marshal," he said, stepping aside. No clipboard, no questions, just respect. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own family had shut me out, yet a stranger opened the door without hesitation. Inside, music floated through chandeliers, soft piano keys filling the air. Guests whispered in silk dresses and tailored suits. I slipped into the back row as the ceremony began. Emma stood at the altar, radiant in lace, her veil catching sunlight from the tall windows. Preston beside her looked polished, confident, the very picture of wealth. Jake hovered nearby as best man, shaking hands with relatives of influence. My siblings, flawless as ever, and me, sitting 30 feet away in a seat no one thought I deserved. My heart pounded as I caught sight of Emma's bouquet trembling just slightly in her hands. Did she ever think of me in this moment? Did she wonder if I was out there, alone, forgotten? The vows passed like a blur. Rings exchanged, lips touched, applause rose. I sat motionless, my hands folded, letting the weight of the uniform settle on me like armor. When the guests spilled into the reception hall, I lingered in the back, scanning faces. Preston's relatives clustered near the bar, their laughter sharp, their talk dripping with money, stocks, summer homes, ski trips in Aspen. Their words felt like a different language, one Emma had mastered and I'd never been allowed to learn. I moved to the edge of the room, ordering a club soda from the bartender. The condensation slid down the glass, cold against my fingers. I stayed there, watching, waiting, invisible until I wasn't. That's when I heard her. Preston's mother, pearls tight around her neck, leaned toward a cluster of his relatives. Her voice carried just enough. Emma's family is charming, though I understand she has a sister who's been struggling, some kind of service job, maybe a diner. Very sad, really. An older man, Preston's uncle, if memory served, nodded solemnly. These military types often have trouble adjusting. It's a shame. They rarely find their footing. I felt my jaw clench, a flash of heat rising in my chest. I told myself to stay calm. Years of undercover work had taught me restraint. But then Preston's mother twisted the knife. "Oh, she wasn't really military," she corrected smoothly. "Just some security work that didn't pan out." Emma was very discreet, but you could tell she was embarrassed. Apparently the girl's working in a diner somewhere, barely making ends meet. The words slammed into me harder than any insult Emma or Jake had thrown. They weren't just dismissing me, they were erasing me. And Emma had let them. I set my glass down, the ice clinking sharp against the counter. My pulse thundered in my ears. 3 years undercover. 3 years of silence. 3 years of swallowing their lies. No more. I turned toward them, stepping into their polished circle. Pearls and cufflinks glinted under the ballroom lights as they glanced up, puzzled by the uniformed woman intruding on their gossip. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady, professional. "I couldn't help but overhear you talking about Emma's sister." Every head turned. Preston's mother blinked, startled, her smile faltering as her eyes traveled from my face to the badge shining on my chest. "Oh, I'm sorry, officer. Are you here in some official capacity?" The room hushed. Even the music seemed to dim. I squared my shoulders. Years of silence coiled tight inside me, ready to snap. "Actually," I said, letting the words land heavy, "I am Emma's sister." The air cracked open. Faces froze, mouths fell slightly ajar, eyes darted between my uniform and my words. For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then I saw her. Emma, radiant bride, moving quickly across the room, veil trailing behind her. Her eyes locked on me, widening as recognition battled disbelief. "Becca?" she breathed, her voice carrying just enough for the crowd to hear. "What are you doing here, and what are you wearing?" The circle broke as she stepped in. My sister. The same woman who had once told me I wasn't welcome. I turned to face her, every ribbon and medal glinting in the chandelier light. And for the first time in years, she really looked at me. "Becca," Emma whispered again, her voice catching on my name. "What are you doing here? And what are you wearing?" The chandelier light spilled across her veil as she stood just inches from me. Her bouquet trembled slightly in her hand, a subtle shake that only I would notice. Behind her, Preston hovered, confusion etched across his carefully groomed face. I faced her squarely, the weight of my dress uniform anchoring me. "This is my uniform," I said evenly. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Rebecca Hayes." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Preston's mother's hand flew to her pearls. The uncle who had dismissed me as some failed military type blinked rapidly, his lips parting but no words coming out. Emma stared, her eyes flicking from my badge to the ribbons across my chest. For a moment she looked like a stranger, caught between disbelief and horror. "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "You work in a diner. You've been washing dishes for 3 years." My jaw tightened. "No, I've been working undercover for the U.S. Marshals Service for 3 years. The diner was my cover." Her face drained of color. "You're lying." The word stung more than I expected, though I had braced for it. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my jacket and withdrew the leather credential case. The seal of the Marshals Service glinted under the ballroom lights. I handed it to her without a word. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. My photo stared back, my name, my rank, my badge number, proof she could no longer deny. Preston leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. "Oh my God," he breathed. You're federal law enforcement." "Special Operations Group," I confirmed. "We handle high-risk fugitives and undercover operations." The silence in that ballroom was suffocating. For once, Emma wasn't the center of attention. She was standing in the shadow of the sister she had dismissed. Then Jake's voice cut through. "What's going on here?" He shoved his way through the crowd, his suit rumpled from the commotion. His eyes landed on me. "Becca, what the hell are you wearing?" I turned toward him, calm, unflinching. "This is my dress uniform. Jake, meet Deputy U.S. Marshal Rebecca Hayes. You might remember her as your so-called dishwasher sister." His mouth opened and closed. His eyes darted across every detail, the pressed fabric, the shining badge, the rows of ribbons. No, this can't be real. You failed out of the military. You've been working minimum wage jobs." I met his gaze steadily. I didn't fail out of anything. I served 8 years in the Army Military Police, including 2 tours in Afghanistan. I earned a Bronze Star under enemy fire. When I left the Army, I was recruited directly into the Marshal's service. Whispers rose around us, the crowd swelling closer. Preston's relatives craned their necks. Club staff froze with trays in their hands, eyes wide. Emma's bridesmaids hovered nervously by the cake table, whispering. Jake's voice faltered, desperate now. "But the money! You needed money. You were struggling with rent." "My rent was paid by the government," I said, my tone clipped, "along with my salary, my benefits, and hazard pay for risking my life every day. My starting salary as a deputy marshal was higher than what you earned in your first 3 years at the law firm." Emma gasped softly, a tear sliding down her cheek. Jake looked like he'd been slapped. I turned to face them both. "You uninvited me from this wedding, Emma. You told me not to come because Preston's family wouldn't approve. You handed me a check, Jake, like I was some charity case. You told me not to contact you until I got my life together." The shame on their faces was visible, raw and unfiltered. Emma couldn't meet my eyes. Jake stared down at the polished floor, his jaw clenched tight. Preston's mother stepped forward, her cheeks flushed. "Marshal Hayes, I owe you an apology. The things I said—" "You said what you believed to be true," I cut in, my voice still calm but edged with steel. "But what you believed was a lie, because that's what my family let you believe." The words hung heavy. For the first time, Emma and Jake looked small. Not powerful, not perfect, just small. Emma finally found her voice, shaky and fragile. "Why didn't you tell us?" she whispered. "Because I couldn't," I said simply. "My cover had to be convincing. That meant you had to believe it. And you did, more easily than I ever thought possible." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "But even if I could have told you, I'm not sure I would have. Because you made it very clear you were ashamed of me." Emma's bouquet slipped slightly in her grip. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Becca. I'm so sorry." I studied her face. For the first time in years, I saw something that looked like genuine regret, but it was tangled with something else. Fear. Fear of what this revelation meant in front of all these people. Fear that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. Jake cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "Becca, No," I said sharply. "You don't get to rewrite history in one night. You told me to disappear, and I did. But you don't get to decide who I am now." The crowd was still, waiting for what came next. My siblings, flawless, untouchable for so long, were exposed. Their words, their judgments, unraveling before everyone who mattered to them. And yet, standing there, I felt the sting of something unexpected. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't the satisfaction I thought I'd feel after years of humiliation. It was exhaustion. 3 years undercover, 3 years of silence, 3 years of pain. And now, this moment of truth that felt less like victory and more like breaking open old wounds. The ballroom suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I glanced around at the wide eyes, the whispers, the stunned silence. This wasn't just about proving myself anymore. It was about realizing how far apart we had grown, how much had been lost. Emma reached for me, her bouquet trembling, her voice desperate. "Stay. Please stay and let everyone see who you really are. My sister, the federal marshal." I hesitated, my heart pounding. Every instinct screamed to walk away, to escape before I drowned in this ocean of judgment and half apologies. But I stayed still, caught between the person I had become and the girl who once wanted nothing more than her sister's approval. Jake stepped closer too, his eyes raw. "Becca, I need to apologize. I need you to know I was wrong." His voice cracked. For the first time, he wasn't the confident attorney or the smug older brother. He was just a man facing the truth. My throat tightened. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to accept it, to let years of rejection be wiped away in one night. But forgiveness isn't that simple. The music had stopped completely. All eyes were on us, and I realized painfully that no matter what was said next, nothing would undo the years of silence. I took a deep breath, my eyes stinging, my chest heavy. "You both made your choices," I said quietly, "and so did I." The words hit them like a blow. Emma's bouquet slipped, petals scattering on the floor. Jake's shoulders sagged. For a heartbeat, I thought I might break too. The hurt, the anger, the years of loneliness all pressing down, demanding release. But before I could speak again, before I could decide whether to stay or walk out, someone cleared their throat loudly. A staff member stepped forward, eyes darting nervously between us and the restless crowd. "Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere private," he suggested. The spell broke. Guests stirred, whispers rising louder, the buzz of gossip crackling through the air like static. Preston guided Emma back a step, shielding her instinctively, though she barely noticed. Jake rubbed his forehead, looking suddenly 10 years older. And me? I stood there rigid in my uniform, surrounded by a storm of whispers and stares. I had revealed the truth. I had shattered the lie. But in the echo of that moment, all I felt was the weight of what came next. Because truth alone doesn't heal. And I wasn't sure my family, or I, was ready for what the truth demanded. The staff member's voice faded into the background. Guests shifted uneasily, whispering behind manicured hands. My name rippled across the room in low tones. Rebecca Hayes, U.S. Marshal, as if it were both revelation and scandal. I stood still, my boots planted on the polished ballroom floor, the weight of my uniform pressing heavier with every passing second. My instinct was to withdraw, to escape the spectacle, but something in me refused to shrink. Not now, not again. "Becca!" Emma's voice cracked. She clutched her bouquet, petals scattered from where they'd fallen. "I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," I cut in, sharper than I intended. 3 years ago, you told me I wasn't good enough to stand beside you. You believed it so easily, Emma. You still do. Don't stand here and rewrite it now because the truth is inconvenient. Gasps flickered through the crowd. Emma's cheeks flushed red, her tears catching light like glass. Jake stepped forward, palms out. Becca, listen, we were wrong. I was wrong. But you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I snapped. You offered me money to disappear, Jake. You put a dollar amount on my worth and left it on a counter like a tip. And when I walked away, neither of you followed. His face twisted, guilt and pride wrestling behind his eyes. I thought you'd call, that you'd prove us wrong. I laughed bitterly. Prove you wrong? That's not how family works. Family doesn't demand proof. They stand beside you even when they don't understand. The words landed heavy. Jake's shoulders sagged, and Emma's bouquet slipped completely from her grip, hitting the floor with a dull thud. For the first time in years, I let the anger breathe. All the swallowed humiliation, the silent nights, the ache of being erased. I let it out, each word deliberate, cutting through the ballroom air. You wanted me gone. You got your wish. But while you polished your lives and measured success in promotions and weddings, I was living in filth and fear to bring down monsters. I spent 3 years earning the trust of men who bought and sold human beings. I watched children get pulled from trucks like cargo, and while I fought for strangers, my own family wrote me off as a failure. The crowd was silent now. No whispers, no shifting, just silence. Emma's face crumpled, tears streaking her makeup. Jake looked pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. Becca, Emma whispered, her voice almost gone. I didn't know. If I had... You didn't want to know, I said. That's the truth. You were embarrassed by me. You let Preston's family believe I was pathetic because it was easier than defending me. Preston, who had stood awkwardly beside Emma until now, finally spoke. That's not fair. Emma didn't know the truth. None of us did. I turned to him. And why didn't she? Because she didn't ask. Because she didn't care enough to look past what she thought she saw. He flinched at that. Even Emma seemed to fold inward, the weight of the words pressing down. I scanned the crowd, dozens of eyes fixed on us, people who would leave tonight with a story. Emma's perfect wedding shattered by the sister she'd discarded. And yet, I wasn't ashamed. For the first time, I felt no need to apologize for who I was. I stepped closer to Emma and Jake, my voice low but carrying. This uniform doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't magically fix the years you decided I wasn't worth loving. But it does remind you, and me, that I never needed your approval. Not then, not now. Emma broke, sobbing openly, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Jake's eyes glistened, though he fought the tears. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had wanted this moment, to stand taller than their judgment, to finally prove myself. And here it was, unfolding in front of everyone they cared about. But instead of triumph, all I felt was release. The truth was out. The lie was dead. I turned slightly, raising my voice just enough for the circle of Preston's relatives still lingering near the bar. You were gossiping about a failure. Let me correct you. I am a deputy U.S. Marshal. Last week, I led an operation that put 17 traffickers behind bars and freed 43 victims. 12 of them were children. That's who I am. The uncle who had dismissed me earlier lowered his gaze, his jaw tight. Preston's mother looked stricken, her pearls trembling against her throat. "Marshal Hayes," she said, voice wavering. You owe me nothing," I interrupted. "You believed what my family told you. They wanted you to see me as an embarrassment. I was willing to let you think that, because my work demanded it. But today you see the truth." A heavy silence lingered before Preston's father, whom I hadn't even noticed before, stepped forward. A tall man with silver hair, his presence carried quiet authority. "I'm a federal judge," he said, voice steady, "and I've worked with marshals my entire career. Deputy Hayes, your service is extraordinary. This family should be proud." The weight of his words shifted the room. Respect rippled through the crowd. Some guests nodded subtly, others whispered with new reverence. Emma looked stricken, clutching at Preston's arm for support. Jake stared at the floor, shame radiating off him. I let the silence stretch, let the truth sink deep. Then I stepped back, breaking the circle, releasing the tension that had strangled the room. "This isn't your day, Emma," I said finally. "It's your wedding. Enjoy it. Live the life you've built. But don't forget this moment. Don't forget what it cost us all." Her sobs quieted, her lips trembling around words she couldn't form. Jake opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I turned, scanning the ballroom one last time. The chandeliers glowed overhead, the polished floor gleamed, the air thick with perfume and judgment. I felt the eyes on my back as I moved toward the exit. Each step was steady, deliberate. My boots clicked against marble, echoing louder than the whispers. I reached the door, the night air spilling cool across my face. Behind me, Emma called out, just one word, broken and desperate. "Becca!" I froze, my hand on the doorframe. Every instinct told me to keep walking, to leave her voice behind the way they had left me. But part of me hesitated, because no matter the uniform, no matter the medals, no matter the strength I'd built, she was still my sister. And that truth was heavier than any badge I carried. I stood at the door, Emma's voice breaking across the ballroom like glass. "Becca!" The crowd held its breath. My hand lingered on the frame, my back still to her. For 3 years I had carried the silence she gave me. For 3 years I had let her absence weigh heavier than the dangers I faced in the field. And now she was calling after me, her voice laced with desperation, as if one word could undo everything. I turned slowly. Emma's eyes were wet, her veil slightly crooked, her bouquet abandoned on the floor. Jake stood beside her, shoulders hunched, the confident attorney stripped down to shame. Preston's arm was around her, but his gaze was fixed on me, equal parts respect and disbelief. For a moment, I saw them not as the polished siblings who had cast me out, but as flawed people finally forced to face themselves. I realized then that I didn't need their approval. I never had. "I'm not leaving angry," I said, my voice calm, steady, "but I am leaving, because I don't need to stay here to prove myself anymore. I know who I am. That's enough." Emma's lips trembled. Can we start over?" I shook my head softly. "Not tonight, maybe someday. But tonight isn't about me. It's your wedding. Live in it." Her tears spilled, but she nodded. Jake opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Silence can wound, but sometimes silence is mercy. I stepped outside into the cool night. My Ford Explorer gleamed under the lamps, a familiar anchor after a storm. Sliding into the driver's seat, I caught my reflection in the mirror, uniform sharp, eyes tired but unbroken. The girl who once stood small in that kitchen was gone. The woman staring back had survived war zones, traffickers, and her own family's rejection. As I drove away, headlights cutting across the quiet streets, I let the weight lift. I didn't need Emma's praise or Jake's apology to know my worth. The best revenge isn't humiliation, it's transformation. It's living as fully, fiercely, and authentically as you were always meant to. Somewhere inside, the little sister who once craved their approval finally let go. And maybe, just maybe, that was freedom. If you've ever been cast aside by people who should have loved you, I hope my story reminds you, their rejection doesn't define you. What defines you is what you build in the silence, the strength you discover when no one is watching. Sometimes the people closest to you won't see your worth until it's undeniable. And even then, forgiveness is your choice, not their entitlement. So if this struck a chord with you, share your thoughts below. Someone might need to hear your courage tonight. And if stories like this resonate, about betrayal, resilience, and family, stay with us here at Family Power Stories. Like, comment, and subscribe, because your voice might be the lifeline someone else is waiting for.